Hey guys, it's Christian, and welcome to another episode of the Complete Filmography Review, where I take a filmmaker who's done 10 or so films and go through the filmography and get my thoughts on them. And for this week, I chose George Lucas. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. I know not all of his films are great. I know some of the prequels aren't really all that good, but I think he's a very good storyteller, and he's a very good just like visual creator, very good visionary. He, revolutionized the film industry, created the summer blockbuster. He revolutionized digital editing and visual effects and sound design. So I think he's definitely worth talking about. And for this video, I'm only going to be going through his Star Wars movies, not THX 1138 or American Graffiti, even though those films are obviously very great. But for this video, I just wanted to go through the Star Wars ones since those were some of my favorite movies and some of the ones I've seen the most. I grew up with them. So without further ado, let's jump in. So first off, we have Star Wars, or I guess now technically it's called Star Wars Episode 4: New Hope. This is obviously my favorite George Lucas Star Wars movie, just for obvious reason. The prequels aren't really that great, but Star Wars, New Hope is definitely, the classic, the one that started it all off, the one that like revolutionized the film industry. It's like in the National Film Registry, obviously became a pop culture phenomenon and everything. Just from the start, you just get a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You don't really know what's going on. And then suddenly, bam, Star Wars hits up on the screen. John Williams' score, which I'll get to in a second, is like, just hits you like a ton of bricks. I really wish I saw this movie in the theaters, back in 1977, or even in 1997 when they were going to do the re-releases. I was born in 93, so I was obviously a little bit too young for that. Because I remember they were going to be doing the 3D re-releases before Disney bought them out, and I was kind of really looking forward to seeing Star Wars on the big screen. So maybe one of these days they'll release it in theaters and I can watch it then. But you kind of get the scrolling text, and obviously George Lucas was inspired by Flash Gordon serials, and with all the text that kind of goes up on screen. Pans down to the planet of Tatooine, kind of get the Tantive 4 flying overhead and the giant Star Destroyer flying overhead right above you. And I hear reviews and everything of people who've seen that, and that was really the shot that kind of everyone kind of got it from that point. It's Rebels versus Empire. It's you get it all in that one visual. So yeah, thought that was really cool. Obviously he was very much inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the work that Stanley Kubrick and Douglas Trumbull did for that movie with all the visual effects and everything. And then just right away you get the two droids, C-3PO and R2-D2, and they're very much inspired by the droid in the movie Metropolis by Fritz Lang. And George Lucas was very much inspired by Akira Kurosawa, especially the movie Hidden Fortress, with the two kind of peasant characters, bickering as they're juxtaposed with the whole kind of backstory of the war and everything. And he kind of takes a lot of the plot beats from that movie and puts them onto this movie, especially with C-3PO and R2-D2 being these bickering droids, in the middle of this giant battle and everything. Another thing, George Lucas was very much inspired by having the movie told by the point of view of the droids, and you can very much see that they're kind of the first line in the movie, and then you kind of see the movie from their point of view throughout. They're running away from the danger and everything. The stormtroopers are invading the Tantive 4, trying to find the Death Star plans that were explained in the opening crawl. And big bad Darth Vader kind of comes in. And I remember hearing reviews from people as well saying when he popped up on screen, everyone was just boo. They kind of knew from the beginning that he was just going to be this big iconic villain, that kind of the face of the whole franchise, which is really cool. So he's coming in looking for the Death Star plans. Meanwhile, we cut to Princess Leia giving the plans to R2-D2, and him and C-3PO going onto the escape pod and then going down to the planet of Tatooine to find Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then Darth Vader finds the princess and then captures her and takes her to the Death Star. So now you have these true droid characters now really taking on the plot points of Hidden Fortress in the deserts of Tatooine, not really knowing what to do. They're still arguing. They finally decide to part ways. C-3PO goes off into the Dune part of the desert, which another reference to Dune, which is another thing that inspired George Lucas Frank Herbert's Dune. And he gets captured by the Jawas. Meanwhile, R2-D2 goes to the rocky area of Tatooine, gets captured by the Jawas there, and they're kind of reunited on the Jawas transport, another reference to Hidden Fortress. And then we kind of get introduced to Luke Skywalker and Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. I know there was deleted scenes that kind of cut back and forth between the battle in the sky, and then on the ground Luke Skywalker has this binoculars. He's looking up at the battle. It's very much American Graffiti with him and his friends, and Luke Skywalker wanted to go off to the academy and be a hero and everything. And Biggs, his best friend, is yeah, maybe someday, Luke, but right now you have to kind of be this moisture farmer and everything. So I thought that would be interesting if they kind of cut back and forth. But I know George Lucas and Gary Kirsch, the producer, were really just wanting to kind of streamline the plot of the story. So they kind of just had it from the droid's point of view. So they kind of cut all the Luke stuff out and then just had him be introduced naturally as C-3PO and R2-D2 were being sold off and everything. So they get sold off, and then then Luke is cleaning them, and that's when the message comes up from Princess Leia of help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. And Luke Skywalker's like, what the heck is going on? I don't know an Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I know Ben Kenobi. He lives on the Dune Sea, so Luke kind of wants to get involved with this adventure. He's very much like on the fringes of society, like this kind of like outer rim planet. He has that line. It's like, there's a bright center of the universe, on the planet that's farthest from it. So he's very much wanting to go out, have adventures and join the academy and just be a hero. And then that obviously that iconic shot of him looking at the twin sunset, and the John Williams score comes up, and he has that longing for adventure, which is like very relatable to a lot of people wanting to go off for adventures. So he comes back into the garage, sees that R2-D2 is gone, so him and C-3PO go out and try to find him. They find him kind of in like the Tusken area, and they'll get attacked by Tusken Raiders. Luke is knocked out, and that's when Obi-Wan Kenobi finally comes in, does that kind of weird Krayt dragon call or whatever that is, and the Tuskens go away. Obi-Wan and Luke finally meet up with each other, and Luke tells him about the droid. They go back to Obi-Wan Kenobi's home. They finally play the message, and like Obi-Wan Kenobi's like I need you to join me. The whole classic hero's journey of like call to adventure. And Luke's like, no, I gotta do my chores. I gotta help out with the harvest and everything. So then Luke tries to go back home, and then sees that the Jawa transport has been destroyed. And he's like, what the heck is going on? Is this like the Sand people who did this? And then Obi-Wan's like no, like these are Imperial stormtroopers that did this. And then Luke deduces that they're looking for R2-D2. He goes back to the homestead, sees that it's been destroyed. It's on fire. Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru are dead. Very much a scene inspired by The Searchers, where John Wayne's character and his group go back to their homestead and see that it's been destroyed by the Native Americans, and that kind of inspires them to go on their journey. So then Luke is definitely back onto the fight. Back in that earlier scene, Obi-Wan's house, Obi-Wan tells him about his father. His father was a Jedi, and that he was killed by Darth Vader, which gets revealed later on. Spoilers that Darth Vader is actually Anakin's father, but Luke doesn't know that in this one. So he's very much like wanting to join the fight. So now Luke is very much on board with the fight. And they go to Mos Eisley Spaceport so they can find a pilot in order to take them to Alderaan, which was in the message. They find Han Solo. Him and Chewbacca, have their whole iconic scene of introducing themselves in the Millennium Falcon. They finally go off on their adventure. And, there's obviously the very controversial scene with like Han shot first in the original version. And then in all the special editions, it's like Han and Greedo shoot at the same time. And, Han Solo's head is like CGI'd, put to the side, and as the blaster bolt fires past him, and then in this Disney Plus version, Greedo says like McClunky, and it's just like, oh, okay. So, but anyway, they finally board the Millennium Falcon. The stormtroopers are like going after them. They fly off to Alderaan. They go into light speed, which is a very cool visual, and you think like everything's going to be good. And then once they come out of hyperspace, they think that they come into an asteroid collision because earlier Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader were trying to interrogate Princess Leia in order to find where the rebels' hidden base was. And Tarkin was threatening her, saying like, we're going to destroy your home planet of Alderaan if you don't tell us where this rebel base is. Leia tells him that it's Dantooine, but Tarkin's like, you're far too trusting, and then destroys Alderaan anyway. So then it becomes like pieces of meteor and everything. So then when the crew, Han, Luke, Obi-Wan, and Chewbacca and the droids, finally get to Alderaan, it's all been destroyed. And that's when they finally see the Death Star in the distance. The iconic line, like, that's no moon, that's a space station. They get sucked into the Death Star, and they have to have this whole plan of trying to get out of the Death Star so they can get to the Rebel base. So Obi-Wan goes off and then disables the ray shields, while Luke and Han find out about, Princess Leia is actually on the Death Star, and they have to rescue her. So it's kind of like the whole, like, rescue the princess from the castle. Very much like that George was inspired by all those different stories, like Seven Voyages of Sinbad and Adventures of Robin Hood and all this stuff. So they rescue the princess. Obi-Wan shuts down the shields. He has his battle with Darth Vader, lightsaber duel, and he's trying to distract the stormtroopers so that the crew can get away. Kind of gives his life, he joins the Force. Darth Vader slashes him down, and then his robe kind of like falls down along with his lightsaber. So then the crew gets away. They have that whole cool TIE fighter battle, dogfight in space. That was another thing that George Lucas was inspired by to create Star Wars, is that he just wanted to see like a dogfight in space, and then he finally got one with this one. Very much inspired by like World War II. So when they get away, they finally get to the Rebel base. R2-D2 is finally able to show the Death Star plans, and Luke sees everything on the monitor, that the exhaust port is a place that they can fire a proton torpedo in and can blow up the entire station. So the whole like final battle, assault on the Death Star, all the kind of like the X-Wing pilots and like the Y-Wing pilots are all picked off one by either Darth Vader and his personal TIE fighter, or by like the gun guns that are like in the Death Star trench. Comes like an all hope seems lost kind of thing. Nearly all the X-Wing pilots are destroyed. Luke is really like the only one left, along with Wedge, because he was shot and then kind of had to fly off. Biggs was killed off, so it's really like all up to him. He has everything on the target computer, and he's about to shoot it, but then he hears Obi-Wan's voice saying, "Luke, use the Force. Let go, Luke. Luke, trust me." So then turns off his target computer, and everyone's like, "You turn off your target computer. What's wrong?" He's like, "Nothing. I'm all right." And uses the Force. Closes his eyes right when he's about to get shot by Darth Vader. Han Solo finally flies in because earlier, all he wanted was like the money, like the reward, and kind of flies off. But then he comes back, shoots Darth Vader. He kind of goes spinning off into the sequel, and then Luke's all clear to finally last shot. The proton torpedo goes into the exhaust port. The heroes fly away, and just before Tarkin's about to pull the trigger to fire the Death Star on the base, Death Star blows up. Everyone cheers, everyone's all happy, and happily ever after, they fly off into like the next scene where they have the medal giving ceremony. Except Chewie doesn't get a medal, but I guess in a comic book it said he wasn't able to get a medal because he's too tall and Leia can't put it around his neck or something like that. So everything's all happily ever after. Iris out, and then written directed by George Lucas, and get the great John Williams score and everything. So yeah, overall, like as you can see, I'm a very much a New Hope fan. It's probably my second favorite Star Wars movie overall, just behind Empire Strikes Back. After that, it just became a pop culture phenomenon. Biggest movie of all time until E.T. dethroned it. Became a franchise, revolutionized the film industry. Created the summer blockbuster, kind of changed what films were being made, because everything was before that was very much serious, like Godfather and all these very dark, serious movies. Now everything's like all fun. This and like Jaws created the summer blockbuster, had all these like accolades for like visual effects and sound design and production values and costuming, makeup, all this stuff. Yeah, I mean the rest is history. There's not really much else. And then George Lucas was able to make like the sequels because of his whole deal with Fox of like, instead of having extra money to like write and direct, he wanted to kind of retain the rights to make sequels and merchandising. And then the rest is history with that. He was able to make his sequels, and the toys became phenomenon, and everything kind of created that whole industry of like having merchandise sell the movie as well. So he was able to do that, and then kind of took a break because as he was making New Hope and everything, he went through a divorce with his wife Marcia Lucas, and he kind of just took a step back from the directing and became more of a producer for like Indiana Jones and all these other movies and stuff. Then he finally came back with the prequels, and that's what we'll get into next. But at least for New Hope, overall it's one of my favorite movies of all time. As you can see, I'm a huge Star Wars fan because of it, because of George Lucas. Even though going through all that tumultuous production, people didn't believe in him and his project and his vision throughout production, throughout pitching the idea, throughout post-production, up until release. There's only like 32 theaters that would show it, and then obviously once it became a pop culture phenomenon, more and more theaters started opening up, and even like George Lucas was like having like lunch with his wife, and like he looked across the street and he saw like the line wrapped around like the Grauman's Chinese Theater. It was like, what movie's playing over there? It's like, oh, Star Wars. Wait, what? I guess it's a pop culture phenomenon. So all that to say, like, great movie. Glad that it created a franchise and created a fandom for people to enjoy. And yeah, what more can I say? Just an amazing movie. All right, now we move on to The Phantom Menace, and yep, this is a very controversial movie. I think this is probably my maybe like third least favorite. I think Attack the Clones and Rise of Skywalker like rank below this one, but it's definitely kind of in like the lower tier of movies for me, for obvious reasons. Right when this movie was like coming out, like again, like I was only like 6 years old when this movie came out, so I wasn't really quite into the fandom as much. But I know a lot of people who grew up with the original trilogy were like so looking forward to this movie. It was like the most hyped film of like all time when it was coming out, because obviously the original trilogy was just so good, like part of people's childhoods and this pop culture phenomenon. So expectations were like exponential when Phantom Menace was being in production. And the reason why George Lucas wanted to make this movie, when he was making the original Star Wars, he had kind of like the backstory for what happened beforehand. He didn't really have any intention of actually making it, just because it would have like a lot of production values and a lot of visual effects and everything. But then once Jurassic Park came out, he was very much inspired to go back into the backstory and write the prequels and everything. The 1st November 1994, you can see like the behind the scenes of Phantom Menace, him like typing on his computer and like writing different notes and stuff for it. And then eventually Phantom Menace was released, and yeah, it was a little bit of a disappointment, to say the least. But anyway, to get into it, kind of starts off with Star Wars and, the opening crawl and everything. So people were like really excited about that. But then, the opening crawl talks about, the taxation of like trade routes and everything. You're just like, wait, what was happening? And then classic pan down to the ship and you see qui-gon and Obi-Wan kind of on that mission to negotiate with the Neimoidians to kind of end the taxation of trade routes to the planet of Naboo. And yeah, kind of right from the beginning, this is very much like sort of like lifeless in a way. The performances are kind of flat. The music is a little bit flat. The filmmaking, it's not really dynamic in a way. I mean, it does kind of pick up a little bit. With like the droid Dekaz coming out and like trying to kill the Jedi and everything because negotiations like obviously failed with the Neimoidians. Like I just wish there was like a little bit more like a balance. Like I wish we had kind of like those dynamic performances from the original trilogy in this one because everything just seems like just very flat. Like obviously that's kind of like the big kind of controversy about this movie is that everything just feels really like lifeless. The visual effects are pretty great, but just like the performances, the acting, the writing, the direction, it's just not really all that great. And I think because like George Lucas when he was writing the prequels, he was really much kind of wanting to reach out to different filmmakers to kind of take over, but all of them were saying like, no, George, I really think like you should do this because this is really your vision. And George Lucas had like that very long hiatus of not directing anything since A New Hope. And so I'm sure like this was kind of him trying to get back into writing and directing and everything. Even when he made A New Hope, like he wasn't really like the best director or everything. All the direction he would say is like, faster and more intense. And, like you can like read like interviews and stuff. Like he was definitely not very much like an actor's director. He would just like say, hey, I wrote it right there. Just do that. You can see like the behind the scenes of like, Harrison Ford saying, yeah, you can't just do that and make it work. So yeah, I can definitely see like why, it was definitely like a struggle for the actors to really get into their roles in this one and really to help George Lucas, make his vision, come to life. And, I feel like a lot of people didn't really challenge him on his vision as much as they could have with this one. And proof's in the pudding with it. I wish I could say he kind of improved for Attack the Clones, but I can't really say that. But I'll get to that a little bit later. But anyway, back to, Phantom Menace. So the battle droids go after the Jedi. They escape onto Naboo on one of the transports as they're kind of invading Theed Palace. They kind of end up in the forest of Naboo and they meet up with Jar Jar Binks and another controversial character, which a lot of people say he's kind of like a Rastafarian stereotype. I don't really see him as a stereotype. I just mostly see him just kind of as an annoying character. I know George Lucas was trying to have like a funny character in Star Wars, in the vein of like C-3PO and like R2-D2, like the comedic characters, but I think he kind of just overdid it a little bit with Jar Jar Binks. And I know he's supposed to be playing like the buffoon character, and he's supposed to kind of have like an arc in the movie where he's very much at the beginning, very much like the buffoon, tripping over himself and creating all this chaos within his home world and everything. And then at the end of it, becomes like a general and all that, where he still kind of fumbles his way through. But yeah, I think George kind of just overdid it with his character, and I can definitely understand the hate for him, which is probably why he got reduced in Attack the Clones significantly and in Revenge of the Sith, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, I mean, hey, what can you do? So yeah, they meet up with Jar Jar Binks. They go down into like the Gungan City and meet up with Boss Nass because they need to get to Naboo. So they get onto a ship, one of the water ships, and then they go through the planet core and meet up with all these different monsters and get away. And they finally get to the other side into the palace, rescue the queen. They get onto one of her ships, the classic battle droids, Roger Roger. They get past the battle droids, they come down like butter, which I guess, George Lucas intended for them, because he's obviously going to be setting up the events in Attack the Clones, where they need an army of the Republic and they need, someone to take on all these battle droids and everything. But anyway, yeah, they get onto the ship and they fly off through the blockade. The hyperdrive gets shot, even though all the Astro droids and where R2-D2 is, introduced, try to help out, but he helps them, gets shields up, and they fly past the blockade, but the hyperdrive is still leaking, so they have to land on a planet to repair and fuel the ship. Obi-Wan finds Tatooine. They go to not Mos Eisley, but Mos Espa, and they meet up with young Anakin Skywalker, which is another kind of, I guess, controversial character. I think George Lucas was originally wanting him to be a little bit older, have him be like a teenager, but he wanted to have like the separation between him and his mom to be more dramatic, so he made him 9 years old, which is like, eh. And then you can see like on the behind the scenes of Phantom Menace when he's casting, there's obviously a child actor who's like so much better than Jake Lloyd, who he could have went with, but he went with Jake Lloyd because I guess he's a little bit more unpredictable and everything, and not the best actor. And then now you can kind of see where his career went because so many people hated on Jake Lloyd's performance. performance, which I don't think is like horrible. It's just between like the two actors that he could have chosen that first actor who was definitely a lot better acting than Jake Lloyd. But anyway, so they find young Anakin Skywalker. They try to make a deal with Watto to get the part for the hyperdrive. Qui-Gon tries to do like the whole Jedi mind trick, but since Watto's a Toydarian, doesn't work on him, so they have to turn back and go back to the ship and try to find another place to get a part. And right when they're kind of like looking around and everything, Jar Jar being Jar Jar is like trying to get that kind of like frog food stuff. He shoots his tongue at it, and once he finds out the price for it, he's like whoopee whoopee, and like throws it, hits Sebulba. Sebulba obviously gets angry, tries to choke out Jar Jar. Anakin comes in and tells him off, and they find out that there's like a sandstorm coming, so Anakin decides to take him back to his home so they can like wait out the sandstorm and everything. And then that's when they meet his mom, Shmi Skywalker. They talk about pod racing and how Anakin's like the only one who can do it, and Qui-Gon senses that he's force sensitive and everything. They kind of make this arrangement of if Anakin wins the pod race, then they can like win the part, and then possibly Anakin can be free. The next day they go to Watto's place and make this deal. So then we get the whole like pod race sequence, which was obviously inspired by Ben-Hur, the whole chariot race scene, which I think the pod race scene is actually pretty cool. A lot of people like criticize because it just kind of stops the story, and it's just kind of like this whole big visual effects phenomenon. But I remember, when that was coming out, like that was like a big deal and everything. I remember like kind of the arcade game where you're kind of in the pod racer, flying it and everything. So I appreciate it. I think it's like a really cool sequence, and it's kind of like essential. It kind of shows Anakin being force sensitive and being like the only human who could pod race. So yeah, they have like the 3 laps, and Sebulba being Sebulba pretty much like cheats and gets rid of all the other pod racers. He almost gets rid of Anakin, but then Anakin, being a little genius, is able to kind of get through it, and then gets past Sebulba in like the final lap, and wins the pod race, wins his freedom. They're able to get the part that they need, and Qui-Gon tries to negotiate with Watto to get Shmi Skywalker free, but things didn't really work out. So then it's just Anakin who has to be the one who kind of leaves, and then we get that whole emotional sequence of him leaving his mom, and that'll obviously lead into the events of Attack the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. So then they fly off back to Naboo. Now they have the part they need, and we kind of get into like the drag of the movie where Anakin's with the Jedi Council and they don't trust him because he's 9 years old, and they sense the dark side of him. Yoda, puppet Yoda is all like, fear leads to anger leads to hate leads to suffering. So we get that whole scene, and then we have the whole sequence of like the Queen negotiating what they should be doing about the taxation of the trade routes with the Neimoidians on Naboo, and Chancellor Valorum, the vote of no confidence to kind of get him kicked out, and then have a new chancellor in his place, which we get introduced to the character of Palpatine, who's secretly the Emperor. Spoiler alert. This is kind of like his start to his rise of power within the Senate. So we kind of have these two kind of juxtapositions going on, but then towards the end, everything kind of gets resolved. Qui-Gon goes against the council and decides to train Anakin himself, even though he has Obi-Wan as his apprentice already, but he wants to kind of go behind his back. So he's like talking with Anakin. He's like, I know I'm not allowed to train you, but I want you to watch my movements and like see how everything goes. And then on the flip side, Chancellor Valorum is kind of kicked out of the Senate, and then Palpatine is kind of nominated as a chancellor instead of being a senator. And the Queen decides to actually go back to Naboo and kind of like fight for her freedom of her people essentially, and kind of like go around like the Senate's back and like just do things herself. So then we kind of get into like the third act where we kind of get the 4 different storylines, which is definitely an issue. But when George Lucas was actually editing, him and his editor Ben Burt were just like, oh, there's just so much going on, you can't really take anything out without like jumping and like having things like not make sense and everything. So we have our 4 storylines. We have Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan going after Darth Maul, who's the apprentice of Darth Sidious, who is secretly Palpatine, when to have Revenge of the Sith. So they're having their whole lightsaber duel. And then we have the Queen kind of like in the palace trying to go through the different parts of it in order to find the Viceroy and capture him. And then we have Anakin in the battle in the sky. He kind of bumbles his way into one of those N1 fighters and somehow starts the ship up. He's trying to like destroy all the battle droids and everything, and then he kind of flies off into like the sky battle. And then we have the ground battle with Jar Jar and Boss Nass and Captain Tarpals with the other Gungans going against the battle droids, kind of lead them away from the city. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon have their duel with Darth Maul. Darth Maul slays down Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan goes after him, and then he kills him off, slices him in half, and then he's dead until Clone Wars. The Queen finally gets into the chambers and like captures the Viceroy. Anakin kind of goes into the battle droid control ship, destroys the core, and then the battle droids get shut down on the ground where Jar Jar Binks and the rest of the Gungans are fighting, so they're all shut down, and then everything's all good. And then we kind of get to like the epilogue where Obi-Wan is accepted to be Anakin's master, and he becomes a Jedi Knight himself instead of being a Padawan learner. And then we have like the whole funeral scene of like Qui-Gon, being burnt and everything. And then we have, the very end sequence, echo to A New Hope, of like the whole like celebration and everything. Palpatine's like the new chancellor. The Queen finally has her freedom in Naboo. They had their whole like resolution with the Gungans. Now the Gungans are finally at peace with the people of Naboo, and everything's all good. And yeah, I haven't seen this movie in theaters, but I know like a lot of people like watch this movie over and over and over and over and over again in theaters, because like they're like, oh, maybe it wasn't good the first time, maybe it'd be better the second time, and their positivity for it kind of kept going down and down and down, and until eventually we kind of are where we are right now, where it's probably like one of the most hated Star Wars movies until Attack of the Clones, which a lot of people hate even more. But I mean, hey, it made tons of money, became one of the highest grossing Star Wars movies, kind of like allowed George Lucas to, I guess, see things that he could improve on for the continuing prequels. We got Clone Wars out of it, we got introduced the character of Darth Maul, which we got to continue on in Clone Wars, which is awesome. But yeah, overall, like a lot of people feel like you can kind of skip Phantom Menace and then just kind of go on to Attack the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, which I can totally see. Once we get to Attack the Clones, there's like that 10-year time jump, and a lot of characters that were introduced in Phantom Menace aren't really in Attack the Clones. It's really kind of like its own story, so I can see like why people hate on this movie. I don't hate it, but it's definitely not my favorite Star Wars movie, and there's some essential elements in it, but it's definitely very skippable, and there's a lot of like kind of like cringeworthy stuff. But yeah, it's it is what it is. It has some cool action sequences. The lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul is really cool. The sky battle is really cool. This pod race is cool too. But yeah, overall, it's just like, yeah, the characters aren't really great. The writing isn't that great, and the directions like kind of hit or miss. So yeah, that's kind of like my overall thoughts on the movie. But hey, get on to Attack the Clones, and yeah, it doesn't really get that much better. So we move on to Attack the Clones, and yeah, this is probably my second least favorite Star Wars movie. Like I said earlier, like Rise of Skywalker's like right below that one, just because there's like not really anything to enjoy with this movie. I think the clone battle at the end is really awesome. Like I'll get to that in a second, but other than that, like there's not really much going on. Right from the get-go, we kind of pan down onto the planet of Coruscant, and right when you think like everything's all good, Captain Typho is like I guess what's wrong, because there wasn't any danger, the huge explosion, and you think like Amidala died in it, but then you realize that's just a decoy, which George Lucas was inspired by Hidden Fortress, because in that one, you have the princess character, and then you have her decoy who's killed. So he very much inspired to put that into Attack the Clones, and it's going to be kind of this whole kind of assassination plot where like one person's working for another person, where you're like, you have the character of Zam Wessel, who's working for Jango Fett, the bounty hunter who is responsible for the clones, who's actually working for Count Dooku, who's a fallen Jedi, who was Qui-Gon Jinn's previous master, who gets introduced later, who's actually working for Sidious, who's introduced in the last one, and kind of go up the chain of like these different people who are kind of after Queen Amidala, because they have this whole brewing civil war between the Republic and the Separatists, and the main plot for this one is Padme Amidala, who's now a senator, who's not a queen anymore after serving her term, she's just trying to keep the galaxy together while these different planets are kind of like separating from the New Republic. So the whole kind of like plot is to protect Padme, Yoda, and the rest of the Jedi Council, ask Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker to be her protectors, and now it's like 10 years later, Obi-Wan Kenobi is now a Jedi Master, and Anakin Skywalker is now his Padawan, and there's obviously some tension there, because Anakin didn't grow up in the Jedi Council, and he was like 9 years old when they took him, and he's obviously very emotional, because he's attached to his mother, which we'll get to later on. So then they get assigned to be her protectors, and another assassination plot is put on her, and right when they have the whole kind of like space chase to try and find who the assassin is, they find out that it's Zam Wessel. They capture her, Obi-Wan cuts her arm off when they find her in the bar, which is a callback to A New Hope, where cuts off the guy's arm in the bar, which is a callback to Yojimbo, Akira Kurosawa, where Yojimbo cuts off one of the assassin's arms, and that it's kind of like a full circle with that. So they're trying to interrogate her, trying to figure out like what's going on, but then right when she's about to say something, like a dart gets shot into her neck. And, we kind of have these two separate storylines of Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of trying to find out where the dart came from, finds out it was from Kamino, and then finds out about Jango Fett, finds out about the clones, and then finds out that Sifo Dyas actually commissioned the Kaminoans to make a clone army. So he has this whole kind of like 1950s kind of Dick Tracy mystery, going to the 50s diner with Dexter Jester and all that. And then on the flip side, Anakin gets assigned to protect Padme, go back to the planet of Naboo and watch over her. And when, they could have assigned like any other Jedi to protect her, especially since Obi-Wan senses that he has feelings for Padme because, Anakin has that confession of like he's been dreaming of her like every single night and all this stuff, not creepy at all. So then they have their whole romance on Naboo. They, obviously fall in love after 3 days and all that. The whole sand lines, like, I don't like sand, it's coarse, rough, irritating. It gets everywhere. So the storylines kind of diverge back. Anakin has that vision of his mother in pain and everything. So he kind of goes to the planet of Tatooine, tries to find her, another callback to the Searchers. In that movie, the characters go into the Native American camp and then finds his sister and everything. So George Lucas kind of mirrors that in this one. He finds his mother dies in his arms. He comes enraged, slaughters all of the Tuskens. They're like animals, but I slaughter them like animals. He has that scene later on with Padme, and then Padme's still in love with him, I guess, after being a rageful guy and a murderer. But anyway, on the flip side, Obi-Wan kind of goes after Jango to kind of like question him about like, what are you trying to do with all these clones? Like, what's going on? He flies off to Geonosis, has a whole kind of asteroid battle, which is a callback to Empire Strikes Back. Has that kind of like the bombs that Jango fires off, the one that kind of like suck in all the sound that has the brrrr, that whole iconic sound. Jango kind of like has like the thermal missiles on Obi-Wan. He fires off the spare parts canister, blows that up. He hides behind the asteroid, which, is supposed to set up, the events in Empire Strikes Back where, Han and Leia are like on the Millennium Falcon, with the trash kind of go off, and then the Slave One, or I guess Fire Spray now, which is piloted by Boba Fett, Jango Fett's son, sees that and then kind of flies off with him. So it's supposed to set that up. So he goes on the planet of Geonosis, finds out about Count Dooku, how he's working with Sidious, and now there's kind of like just some shady stuff going on, how there's like a war that might be going on. Obi-Wan gets captured. Before that, he sends a message off to the Jedi Council. So the Jedi Council goes to Geonosis to go rescue him. Anakin wants to like stay behind. Padme is like obviously inspired to go after Obi-Wan. So then she and Anakin fly off to Geonosis. They have that whole droid factory sequence, which is kind of pointless, but as I know, there's deleted scenes of them actually in a room with Count Dooku talking about like what's going on with the Senate and the Separatists and the potential civil war. But I guess George Lucas thought that was too boring, so he decided to have like a whole action sequence in the droid factory, which just leads to just them being captured anyways. So Anakin and Padme get captured, are sent to the arena, and they're about to be killed by like the 3 different beasts. But then right at the last second, the Jedi come in, they rescue them. They have the whole kind of arena battle, which is inspired by Gladiator movies. The clones come in and like rescue them, led by Yoda, and they have the whole like Clone War battle and everything. They see Count Dooku flying his ship into like a little facility or something, and then Anakin and Obi-Wan have to go after him. They have the whole lightsaber duel, which is kind of underwhelming. Dooku takes out Obi-Wan, he takes out Anakin, cuts his arm off, which is foreshadowing Empire Strikes Back, where Luke gets his hand chopped off by Darth Vader. And then Yoda comes in, him and Dooku have their force battle because they were former master and apprentice. Dooku shoots lightning, Yoda's able to deflect it, and then, he pulls out his lightsaber, and they have their whole lightsaber battle, which at first I didn't care for, but I mean, it's kind of cool, but I think it would have been cooler if Yoda just kind of kept using the force and didn't have to use a lightsaber and, hop around and everything. I think his battle in Revenge of the Sith between him and the Emperor is pretty cool because, that's all set up beforehand and, they kind of have to use their lightsabers together. But with this one, I guess George Lucas was trying to set up the fact that Yoda can use a lightsaber, but it did look kind of weird just him flipping around and stuff. So I guess I kind of go back and forth. I know some people love it, some people hate it, but I think it would have been better if, he just kind of kept using the Force, and then Dooku, uses the Force, crush that pipe that's about to fall on Anakin and Obi-Wan. Yoda uses the Force to kind of like stop it and then move it aside while Dooku gets away, meets up with Sidious, and then it talks about how the war has begun, and then Sidious is like, excellent, everything is going as I have foreseen. Classic Emperor line. And then the Jedi are reunited. Obi-Wan, Mace Windu, and Yoda talk about how everything's good now that we have the clones, but then Yoda is like, victory, you say? Master Obi-Wan, not victory. The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun, the Clone War has. And we have that whole pan of the clones about to go off into battle. That sets up the whole Clone Wars, which you only get to see a little glimpse of in Revenge of the Sith, and then we get the Clone Wars series after that. And then, we cut to Anakin and Padme, confessing their love for each other, getting married, and, now have to have this whole secret relationship because Jedi aren't supposed to fall in love. So now it's just like, oh no, what's gonna happen? And then, Iris out, and credits and all that. So yeah, I think like overall, Attack of the Clones is another one that feels very much self-contained. I mean, again, kind of like Phantom Menace, there's a lot of like essential elements in it where, sets up the Clone Wars and, sets up Sidious's rise in power, like within the Senate as Palpatine and then outside as the future Emperor. But yeah, it's just like, again, like Phantom Menace, like the dialogue's not great, the acting's not really all that great, and I kind of feel for the actors because really like a lot of this stuff is like shot on green screen and blue screen, and there's a lot more locations in Phantom Menace, but this one is kind of like more 50-50 where it's like half locations, half blue screen. So I'm sure like one, you don't really get that great of a script to work on because George Lucas like only wrote this like a couple weeks before production even started. I know he had a second screenwriter to kind of polish things up, but he kind of really wrote this all in one draft and then just started filming it, so you can see like it's not really as refined as it could be. So yeah, that's kind of a bummer. And then his direction, I guess it improves a little bit more over Phantom Menace, like as far as like the action sequences and stuff, but overall it's not really that much better than Phantom Menace. Again, proof is in the pudding. It became like kind of like the least successful Star Wars prequel at that time. It got outclassed by like Spider-Man and Lord of the Rings and The Matrix and like all this other trilogy movies coming out at the same time, and Harry Potter as well. So yeah, I can definitely see like why people weren't really responding to it. It didn't really improve too much on Phantom Menace. Like I said, it ranks down below Phantom Menace for me, and yeah, there's just not really much to grasp on that's like really cool. I mean, I think Jango's cool, even though he gets killed off by Mace Windu and all that. The clone battle is pretty cool, but yeah, other than that, it's just like kind of like another skippable one. Like I said, there's some essential elements in it, but we really can just kind of jump to Revenge of the Sith and kind of know what's going on. So yeah, it's kind of like my overall thoughts on it. Definitely not my favorite Star Wars movie, but hey, what can you do? All right, and then just sort of like wrap everything up, we'll go on to Revenge of the Sith. And yeah, this is definitely my favorite of the prequels, and I think a lot of people agree as well. The action, the acting looks a little bit better than the previous ones, not by much, but just a little bit. The emotion, the fact that, it's setting up events for New Hope, I think like one of the downsides, it kind of wraps things up a little bit too neatly, but I'll get to that. Right from the get-go, you kind of get this whole epic space battle. You kind of see the dynamic between Anakin and Obi-Wan. Now they're more like brothers instead of like, like the whole father-son dynamic. They're working together a lot, getting through like the enemy ships and then eventually onto General Grievous's ship because the Chancellor was kidnapped. And they kind of set that up in the Clone Wars micro series, which I kind of wish they had that as canon in the Clone Wars series, the 3D animated one, but oh well. In my head, it's canon. So it's cool to see that kind of like setup of General Grievous in the micro series and then, seeing him in live action for Menace the Sith, because I was a little bit older at this time. I was about like 12 years old when this movie came out. So I was definitely, following along. I was watching all the previous prequel movies. I was watching the Star Wars micro series. So I was like super hyped for Revenge of the Sith. It was really like my first Star Wars movie that I saw in theaters. Definitely got my money's worth with that whole space battle. The rescuing of the Chancellor. It's very much inspired by the events of A New Hope, because I know there's a whole like kind of like ring theory out there of like, a lot of events from Revenge of the Sith are kind of like the flip side of the events of A New Hope. So it's kind of cool seeing that. I know nothing from that theory has been confirmed, but I mean, it's kind of cool to think about. So yeah, so they go in, they find the Chancellor in the, kind of like that open chamber room, kind of like a callback to Return of the Jedi, kind of like the setting of that movie. They take out Count Dooku, they rescue the Chancellor, kind of get off the ship, and that's kind of like the start of Anakin's kind of turn to the dark side, and Chancellor Palpatine's turning him to the dark side of like tempting him, because Anakin says like, it's not the Jedi way to kill Count Dooku, he should just stand trial. But Chancellor Palpatine is seeing Dooku failed him. He's obviously has eyes on Anakin to be his new apprentice, that kind of been set up from the previous two movies, and so he's kind of has like an iconic line like, "Do it." And then Anakin slays Count Dooku, and that, he just murdered someone. Again, kind of call back to like when he took out the Tusken Raiders, and, he kind of took revenge because, as Palpatine says, like, he cut off your arm, you want revenge. So yeah, kills Count Dooku, rescues the Chancellor, has that kind of whole like epic kind of crash landing sequence onto Coruscant, and, the plot kind of goes from there, where you kind of have the whole Clone Wars background. Obi-Wan has been assigned to take out General Grievous, because if they take out General Grievous, that'll end the war and everything. So then he goes to Utapau, takes on General Grievous, has his like 4 arms and everything. And, the kind of lightsaber duel in that one's kind of like underwhelming because, we set up in the Clone Wars micro series of him being this big bad villain, taking out all these Jedi, and then this one, Obi-Wan kind of cuts off 2 of his hands pretty easily, and they have their whole chase where, General Grievous is kind of on this whole hamster wheel thing through Utapau. Obi-Wan catches up with him, kind of has like a fist fight with him because Obi-Wan loses his lightsaber, which he gets back later on by Captain Cody, and Obi-Wan's forced to actually shoot General Grievous in the chest and like take out his heart and have him burn up and everything, and has that line like, so uncivilized, throws it away. So he has his whole storyline, and then on the other side, Anakin is kind of bouncing from character to character. On one hand, he has his interactions with Obi-Wan and the Council about him wanting to join the Council, but the Council's really just wanting him to spy on Palpatine because they're expecting, some shady stuff going on with him, which, they could have suspected way earlier, but, I guess Palpatine was just so powerful, blind the Jedi to what's going on. So they're wanting him to spy on the Chancellor. He has this whole scenes with Palpatine. Palpatine's kind of slowly but surely kind of tempting him about the dark side and everything, because earlier Anakin had that dream about Padme dying in childbirth because it's revealed that, Padme's pregnant, and that like what they're going to do, how are they going to hide this and everything. So there's this whole conflict there. So Anakin's trying to find ways to kind of either learn to let his feelings for Padme go or to find a way to save her. So then Palpatine brings up at the opera of this whole backstory of Darth Plagueis about how he influenced the midichlorians, which I won't even get into midichlorians, how controversial those are. But anyway, he talks about how he can influence them to create life, and Anakin's like, is there any way to learn this power? And Palpatine's like, not from a Jedi, implying that you can only learn it from a Sith. So yeah, we kind of have these like different storylines going on. Then eventually Palpatine tells Anakin that he's a Sith Lord that they've been looking for, and that he wants him to join him in order to save his wife, but Anakin doesn't want to have anything to do with that. So then he talks to Mace Windu and then tries to have this whole kind of like arrest of Palpatine. So then Mace Windu and 3 other Jedi go into Palpatine's chambers and try to place him under arrest, but obviously Palpatine's not going to go quietly, so then activates his lightsaber, jumps towards Jedi, takes 3 of them out, battles Mace Windu, but Mace Windu knocks him out. He's about to kill him. Then Anakin comes into the room, and Palpatine like shoots his lightning at Mace Windu, and it gets shot back in his face. A little, I guess, foreshadow to Rise of Skywalker, and which I won't get into that. If you want to see my review for Rise of Skywalker, you can just watch my other videos. So anyway, Mace Windu is about to slay Palpatine, but then Anakin gets his lightsaber out because he knows that Palpatine is like the only person who could help him figure out a way to save his wife. So cuts off Mace Windu's hand. Palpatine shoots him out of the window, which there's theories that Mace Windu actually survived, but we'll see if that's confirmed or not. Probably not. But yeah, so then Anakin, fully gives in to Palpatine, turns to the dark side. They try to find a way to create life, and Palpatine tells Anakin that the Jedi are trying to rise up and try to take over. So, the whole Order 66 sequence is probably the best sequence in the entire movie, of like the clone troopers turning against the Jedi, wiping them all out, and Anakin storming the Jedi Temple, taking out the younglings, which was a very sad scene. And then, him going to Mustafar and then taking out Viceroy Gunray and all the other separatist leaders. Obi-Wan obviously finds out about Order 66. He almost gets killed in Order 66 along with Yoda, and they become the only surviving Jedi. They reunite on Coruscant, meet up with Bail Organa, try to figure out what's going on. They get into the Senate because Bail Organa has a meeting, and then Obi-Wan and Yoda stow away. They go into the Jedi Temple, take out those clone troopers, see the hologram of Anakin taking out the Jedi, and Obi-Wan's like, it can't be. And Yoda has his line of like, twisted by the dark side, young Skywalker has become. So then they kind of go on their separate missions. Obi-Wan meets up with Padme, tells her about Anakin turning to the dark side. Padme doesn't believe him, so she kind of goes off to Mustafar to talk with him. Obi-Wan stows away on the ship, and they kind of fly off together. Meanwhile, Yoda goes into the Senate, tries to take out the Emperor, after he kind of like has his rise to power, where, he talks about like, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society. So now he's Emperor. Yoda goes after him, but fails, and then Padme meets up with Anakin, tries to bring him back to the light side, but he sees Obi-Wan, coming out of the ship. He gets upset, Force chokes out Padme, she goes down. Then Anakin and Obi-Wan have their whole lightsaber duel, which I thought was pretty cool, but I think it's very over the top. Like, when I was a kid watching it, I thought it was like, this is the most amazing lightsaber duel of all time. But then watching it as an adult, it's like, okay, it kind of goes over the top. They kind of go onto like that whole like railing, and then it kind of gets broken off because like they, take out like the shield while they're, swing their lightsabers, and like the lava goes onto the railing, kind of goes down. They're trying to climb up the railing as it's sinking to lava. I'm like, okay, it's kind of going a little bit overboard. But anyway, they kind of go on to like cliff face or whatever, the whole iconic line of, it's over, Anakin, I have the high ground now, you underestimate my power, don't try quiet. Ah! And then, Anakin like jumps up, tries to, jump over Obi-Wan to slam down, but then Obi-Wan activates his lightsaber, slices his limbs off. He's on like the little cliffside right where the lava is. He gets burnt up. Obi-Wan has his lines like, "You were the chosen one. You said to destroy the Sith, not join them. You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." He takes Anakin's lightsaber, and that gets set up for A New Hope, where he gives the lightsaber to Luke, and Anakin's like all burnt up to a crisp. Palpatine comes in, rescues him, takes him to the planet where, he's finally put into like, the Darth Vader suit, and then Obi-Wan takes Padme off. Padme has the twins, Luke and Leia, and then Bail and Yoda and Obi-Wan decide what they're going to be doing with the twins. Bail decides to take Leia and like raise her to become, a princess and everything of Alderaan, and then Yoda and Obi-Wan decide that Obi-Wan should take baby Luke to Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru because that's his family on Tatooine, so then they kind of have their whole separate missions. Meanwhile, we have another fun scene of Darth Vader finally being awakened, like asking where Padme is, and then the Emperor, lies to him saying that in your anger you killed her, and then he's like, "No," which was kind of unnecessary. It's kind of laughable. And then George Lucas, tampering with the original trilogy, puts that whole "no" in Return of the Jedi, where Luke's being shocked by the Emperor. But anyway, so yeah, they're on the Star Destroyer ship. They look into the distance and see the Death Star being constructed, which I guess took like 19 years to be constructed and everything. And I guess George Lucas joked around saying like, "Oh, there were like supply problems and like union disputes, and that's why it took so long for the Death Star to be made." And then we kind of cut to Bail Organa with his wife and Princess Leia, and then we cut to Tatooine with Obi-Wan Kenobi dropping off Luke Skywalker to Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, and they're kind of looking off into the twin sunset, little like callback to A New Hope with Luke looking off into the twin sunset, and then Iris out, and then that's the end of the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Back when we thought that this would be like the end of all 6 Star Wars movies, back when we thought there was going to be 6 movies. So it was definitely like an emotional ending for sure, like watching it and then like not knowing like, oh, well, this is the last Star Wars movie and there's not going to be anything after that. And then, obviously Disney came in and bought Lucasfilm, and then we got the sequel trilogy, and, you already kind of know my thoughts on that if you watch my previous Star Wars videos. But yeah, overall, I think it was definitely a good ending to prequel trilogy, a good ending at the time to the Star Wars saga. I mean, I had like some problems with the fact that, everyone kind of ends up in their exact positions at the start of A New Hope instead of allowing there to kind of be some time in between and kind of implying where these characters end up. So yeah, I think the ending felt kind of rushed in a way where, we have to have everything be exactly the way it is for A New Hope so you can watch it all in sequence. I guess because like this is before like comics and novels and all this stuff that kind of like filled in all the gaps and stuff before it was like canon and stuff. It was kind of like non-canon materials, like legends as it now it is. So I guess George Lucas was like no, this is like a one and done. There's gonna be nothing in between episodes 3 and 4. Like this is it. Everyone's in their positions for A New Hope. So when you watch this, it's just like take out the disc for Revenge of the Sith and then just pop in A New Hope right after, and you wouldn't be confused about anything. So that's the only like, kind of downside about that. But other than that, I think this is definitely the best of the 3, for obvious reasons. There's still like some cheesy dialogue between Padme and Anakin, the whole romance and stuff like that, and kind of an overabundance in like visual effects and whatnot. But I think George Lucas definitely learned his lessons from like the first 2 movies, and I feel like he was definitely more comfortable in this movie than he was in like the previous 2, where he felt like comfortable in the director's chair and kind of really knew what he was doing, where the story was going, and how to kind of direct the actors, the best he could, and the visual effects artist the best he could to make his vision possible. So yeah, I think overall he did a really good job with this one, wrapping up the prequel trilogy and setting events for his original trilogy and everything. So yeah, definitely like a good way to kind of go out on his filmography moving forward. And that's the video. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to comment below saying which Star Wars movie is your favorite one, and be sure to give this video a like and subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one. And may the Force be with you always.